They say inheritance brings peace, but for me, it brought war. I had barely set foot on my grandfather's ranch when a woman I'd never met stormed up the porch, screaming that I couldn't just inherit land and do whatever I wanted with it. Her name was Victoria Hale, president of the local HOA, and in her mind, that gave her power over everything my family had built since 1875. Picture this. I'm standing in a hallway still carrying the scent of pine and old leather, grieving the man who raised me, when this stranger barges in with a clipboard like she's the sheriff of the county. She didn't just knock, she didn't even ask. She marched in, spouting rules about porch swings, century-old oak trees, and even demanded I dig up my family cemetery to meet community standards. It wasn't just arrogance, it was trespass, it was entitlement, and it was the opening shot in what would become a battle for land, legacy, and justice. So let me ask you, what would you do if someone walked into your home, claimed authority they didn't have, and demanded you erase your family's history for the sake of aesthetic harmony? Because for me, that moment was just the beginning. When my grandfather, Elias Thorne, passed away last Tuesday, I thought the hardest part would be the funeral. The man wasn't just family, he was a living monument, the kind of figure that anchored generations. He built the ranch into what it was, 150 acres of rolling pasture, weathered fences, and cattle herds that had carried our name since the late 1800s. The land was more than soil. It was history carved into earth and stone, a place where every oak and fence post told a story. I grew up visiting this ranch, listening to Elias talk about resilience, about how every thorn before us poured sweat into this land. He used to say, if the fences hold, so will the family. Those words sat heavy on my shoulders the night I sat alone in his study, still in my funeral clothes, staring at the will his lawyer had just read. Everything house, livestock, business, and land was mine now. The ink had barely dried, yet the responsibility felt older than me, stretching back through every ancestor who had walked here before. The house itself carried his presence. The leather chair creaked when I sank into it, the same chair where he made decisions that kept the ranch alive through droughts, market crashes, and wars. The walls smelled faintly of pine wood and tobacco, the kind of scent that burrows into memory and never leaves. I should have had time to grieve, to breathe in his absence and reflect on what came next. Instead, trouble came pounding, or rather, barging through the door. Elias never warned me about neighbors like this. In his journals, he wrote about market prices, breeding schedules, and weather forecasts. But not once did he mention an HOA president with a clipboard and a guy living on the edge of the property line. Maybe he thought it beneath him, or maybe he knew I'd discover it soon enough. What I inherited wasn't just a ranch, it was a battlefield in waiting. The will outlined every detail, from bank accounts to land surveys dating back to 1875. It confirmed what we always knew: our ranch was independent, deeded long before Willow Creek estates sprouted up like weeds in the 1990s. Their subdivision was a world apart, neatly paved and manicured, whereas our land stood rugged, free, and authentic. The two weren't meant to overlap. At least, that's what the law said. But paper barriers don't stop people with entitlement in their veins. I remember tracing the survey lines with my finger, following the boundary markers on maps yellowed by time. They showed clear separation, states, the kind of records no one could dispute. Yet even as I studied them, I couldn't shake the thought. Someone, somewhere, was going to try. And then the door creaked. No knock, no pause, just a woman striding in as if she owned the very chair I sat in. Her hair was stiffly styled, her expression even stiffer, and the way she clutched that clipboard told me she'd written my future on its pages without ever asking my name. That was the first time I laid eyes on Victoria Hale, but it wouldn't be the last. The weight of inheritance is heavy enough when it comes with cattle, land, and legacy. Add in a neighbor who thinks they're the law, and suddenly grief turns into confrontation. I hadn't even unpacked, and already I was at war. But, as I was about to learn, this wasn't just about a nosy neighbor. It was about power, greed, and a plot that went deeper than I could have imagined. I hadn't even finished absorbing the weight of Elias's will when she appeared, Victoria Hale, clipboard queen, storming into the study as if she'd been invited. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate, just pushed the door wide open and marched across the threshold like she was collecting rent. She stopped in front of me, hands on hips, eyes scanning the room like a building inspector sniffing out code violations. I remember thinking for a second that maybe grief had made me hallucinate. Who else would have the audacity to waltz into a private ranch house less than a day after the funeral? Mr. Thorne, she said, with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I'm Victoria Hale, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to discuss urgent compliance matters regarding your property. I blinked at her. Compliance? On a ranch deeded in 1875. It would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. She was perched on the edge of Elias's chair now, flippant through papers clipped neatly in her folder, reciting demands with the rhythm of someone used to bulldozing their way through resistance. First, she said crisply, that porch swing needs to go. Our guidelines prohibit visible furniture that disrupts community uniformity. I glanced toward the porch. The swing had been there for decades, built by my great-grandfather after the Spanish flu pandemic. Families had rocked babies on it, celebrated birthdays, even held wakes there, and this woman wanted it removed for uniformity. Before I could even respond, she was on to item 2. Second, that oak tree by your gate. It must be trimmed to meet sightline standards. It's creating a hazard. That oak had been planted in 1923. It was older than half the town, older than Victoria's subdivision, older than the HOA itself. My grandfather told me once that his father planted it as a marker of resilience after the darkest years. To her, it was nothing but an eyesore. But the third demand? That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with arrogance. I was dealing with something darker. Third, she said without a flicker of hesitation, the family cemetery in your west pasture must be relocated to a municipal site within 60 days. Private cemeteries are not in compliance with Willow Creek community standards. I froze. Did she just tell me to dig up my ancestors? My great-grandfather, my grandfather's brothers, everyone who had been buried on this land for more than a century. She wanted them exhumed and relocated like they were. Lawn ornaments ruining curb appeal. The audacity was breathtaking. The cruelty, even more so. Leaning back in the chair, I gave her one last chance to realize how far she'd overstepped. By the way, I said evenly, I'm Governor Thorne. You might have seen me on the news. She blinked, her expression cracking for the first time. For 5 long seconds, she just stared. Then, with unbelievable composure, she waved her hand as if brushing off a fly. Governor or not, she said, you're subject to the rules of our community. The HOA holds state-delegated authority to ensure compliance. That was when I smiled, not out of amusement, but out of disbelief. I held actual state authority. She held nothing but paper fantasies. Yet here she was, declaring herself judge, jury, and executioner over land that had been in my family since before her subdivision even existed. What she didn't realize was that I had the documents to prove it. Deeds, surveys, historical designations, all locked in Ilias's desk and safe. Proof that the ranch was untouchable. Proof that her rules meant nothing here. But in that moment, I didn't throw her out. I let her keep talking, keep digging her hole, while Elias's cameras quietly recorded every word. Because I had a feeling this was only the opening move in a much bigger game. And I was right. The thing about people like Victoria Hale is they speak with the kind of confidence that makes others believe them. She had the posture, the tone, the dramatic flair of someone who'd spent years convincing neighbors that her word was law. Maybe in the cul-de-sacs of Willow Creek, that act worked. But in Elias Thorne's study, surrounded by a century of deeds and records, it was like watching a magician perform with the strings exposed. I rose from the leather chair. Slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch. She didn't flinch. In fact, she started scribbling notes as if she were drafting a violation. Letter right there on my desk. You really think your little HOA has state-delegated authority? I asked finally, my voice calm. She looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Of course. We protect community values. That extends to all adjoining properties. There it was. The sleight of hand. By twisting the word adjoining, she was claiming authority where none existed. I almost laughed, but instead, I reached for the drawer Elias always locked. Inside were thick folders, land surveys, historic designations, water rights, and preservation letters dating back generations. Documents stamped and sealed by county and state officials, proving our independence beyond any doubt. I slid them across the desk here, I said. Read them. She skimmed the top page for all of 3 seconds before waving it off with a scoff. These are outdated. Our bylaws supersede this. Outdated, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. This survey was certified last year by the state registrar. The deed goes back to 1875. Do your bylaws predate the Civil War? Her face tightened, but she pressed on, clinging to her performance. The HOA ensures consistency. Even properties like this must conform if they impact the community's appearance. That was when I leaned closer, voice dropping just enough to cut through her arrogance. You're standing on sovereign property, recognized by federal historic preservation laws. You're trespassing, Mrs. Hale, and every word you've said is being recorded on cameras my grandfather had installed years ago. For the first time, the mask slipped. Her eyes darted to the corners of the room, as if suddenly aware of invisible lenses watching her. But just as quickly, she snapped back, lips curling into a smirk. Record whatever you want. You'll find the law isn't always on your side. Her words carried an undertone that set off alarms in my head. This wasn't just about a porch swing or an oak tree. She was hinting at leverage, at connections, at something larger than neighborhood squabbles. Still, I held the upper hand. You've got 5 seconds to leave, I told her. Pointing toward the door, she gathered her papers slowly, defiantly, like a queen exiting court after being denied. At the threshold, she turned, her eyes burning with a promise. You'll regret resisting the Willow Creek Association. Then she was gone, her heels clacking across the porch like gunshots. I stood there, documents in hand, pulse steady but mind racing. Elias had left more than deeds in that safe. His will had included A cryptic note about emergency papers, something he said would protect the family if the ranch was ever threatened. I hadn't looked yet, but after Victoria's little performance, I knew I'd have to. Because if she was bold enough to waltz into my house and demand I dig up my ancestors, she wasn't acting alone. In whatever game she was playing, she'd just made her first move. The morning after Victoria's uninvited visit, I awoke to a buzzing phone. Motion alerts from Ilias's security system, dozens of them. At first, I figured it was just deer nosing around the fence line, maybe coyotes, drifting too close. But when I pulled up the feed, my stomach tightened. 2 men in coveralls moved along the west fence, cutting wires with practiced ease. Not kids, not vandals, professionals. Their truck, parked just beyond the tree line, bore a logo I recognized instantly: Willow Creek Property Services. The arrogance of it was staggering. They weren't even trying to hide. Zooming in, I caught their faces clear as day. High definition, time-stamped, angles from 3 cameras. They weren't destroying fences randomly, they were removing posts, methodically, section by section, like they were preparing the land for a survey. I grabbed Elias's binoculars and stepped onto the porch. Sure enough, they carried gear, cutters, markers, and surveying tools. This wasn't vandalism. It was an operation. And then my phone buzzed again. A new text. From Victoria. Property crew active. Don't interfere. 60-day deadline stands. She'd incriminated herself boldly, carelessly. I forwarded the footage and her text to my chief of staff, Owen, and then to a journalist friend who'd built his career on exposing corrupt officials. If Victoria thought this was going to be swept under the rug, she was sorely mistaken. But I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. Part of me wanted her to dig deeper, to reveal just how far she was willing to go. Catching her mid-scheme would be better than stopping her now and letting her slink away with excuses. The audio feed made it even worse. One of the men muttered, "Hit the cemetery sections first, then move closer to the house, if no complaints." My blood went cold. The graves, they were targeting my family's resting place, like it was just another patch of land to be bulldozed. Every sound, every movement, every word, they were all captured on Ilias's system. By the time the men wrapped up at noon, I had hours of damning evidence. They left behind neat rows of poled posts, HOA signs staked brazenly into the ground like they were claiming territory, a flag in the dirt, a warning. I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling the files. Photos of their faces, license plates, vehicle logos, the text from Victoria, the audio clip about the cemetery. It was more than enough to press charges for trespass, vandalism, and conspiracy. My attorney confirmed as much when I called. "You've got them cold," he said. "If we file today, we'll have arrests by tomorrow." But filing immediately wasn't the move. Not yet. Something in Victoria's tone, the way she carried herself, told me she wasn't just a busybody with a clipboard. She was playing for bigger stakes, maybe money, maybe land, maybe both. Elias had warned me in his will to check the safe for emergency papers. If what I suspected was true, those papers would explain why Victoria was suddenly so desperate to strong-arm the Thorn Ranch. That night, the cameras caught her driving past slowly, headlights cutting across the pasture, phone pressed to her ear. She paused long enough to snap photos of the damage her own men had caused, like she was cataloging evidence for some twisted report. I watched from the porch, jaw tight. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. By the following morning, the ranch felt different. Not quieter never, that but charged, like the air before a storm. The fences were torn in neat gaps along the west pasture, and the HOA's gaudy signs stood like intruders waving a false flag. To anyone driving by, it might look like some official project. To me, it was an insult, a challenge written in steel and plywood. Instead of rushing to retaliate, I did what Elias had always done when cornered. I documented everything. I spent hours with a camera, taking close-up shots of cut wire, saw marks on wooden posts, tire tracks leading from the tree line, and those ridiculous Willow Creek Association markers drilled into soil they didn't own. For every photo, I logged time, date, GPS coordinates. Then I cross-referenced with security footage to create a complete timeline. It wasn't just evidence. It was a story, a narrative that no judge, no jury, no public official could ignore. By noon, Owen arrived. He was sharp as ever, a man who'd built his reputation untangling shady corporate takeovers. When I showed him the photos and videos, he didn't even blink. "They're not sloppy," he said, scanning the footage. "They're confident. Means they think someone up the chain will cover for them. You've rattled something bigger than an HOA boss." That matched my gut. This wasn't about mailbox paint colors or lawn heights. This was about land. And in Willow Creek, land meant power. Owen tapped the folder where I'd stashed Victoria's text message. "This is the linchpin." She admitted to directing the crew. "You've got her name tied directly to the saboteur. You could end this tomorrow." "I don't want to end it tomorrow," I replied. "I want to know why she's doing this, who she's answering to, what they want with this ranch." That's when I finally opened Ilias's safe again. Beneath a stack of deeds and water rights, I found a leather-bound portfolio marked with his handwriting. Emergency papers open only if threatened. Inside were letters, maps, and one crisp document stamped with the state seal. It was a land covenant, dated 1912, declaring the Thorne property not just private land, but a protected site due to the historic cemetery. No HOA, no county ordinance, no municipal expansion could touch it, not without direct approval from the state legislature. Elias hadn't exaggerated. This ranch was untouchable, but the letters told another story. They hinted at mineral rights. Beneath the property surveyed but never exploited, Elias had fought to keep drillers and developers away for decades, using the covenant as a shield. Now I understood. Victoria's aggression wasn't about aesthetics. She and her backers wanted what was under the soil. I scanned everything, uploading backups to encrypted servers. Then I contacted my journalist friend again. This isn't just trespassing, I told him. It's land theft, possibly fraud, and it goes back generations. By dusk, I had a package ready: photos, footage, texts, letters, and the covenant. Enough to take to court, to the press, or straight to law enforcement, but I still hesitated. If Victoria's crew returned, if they pushed harder, I needed them to expose the whole network, every name, every face, every connection. For now, I'd wait, watch, collect. The ranch wasn't just land anymore. It was bait, and Victoria was about to step into a trap of her own making. Patience had never been my strong suit, but by the time the week ended, I knew waiting had been the right move. Every day Victoria's crew grew bolder, cutting fresh lines in the pasture, planting more HOA signs, and even leaving thin orange survey stakes along the ridge. It was a show of force, the kind meant to intimidate. But intimidation works both ways. I didn't plan on storming their headquarters or ripping down signs in the middle of the night. No, my counterattack would be quiet, methodical, and surgical. If Victoria wanted a war of rules and paperwork, she'd picked the wrong opponent. The first step was exposure. I sent the journalist package everything I had: photos, timestamps, video clips, Elias's covenant, and the incriminating text from Victoria. He nearly tripped over his words on the phone. This isn't an HOA dispute, he said. This is a scandal waiting to detonate. Do you realize how many people read about land fraud cases? Developers buying politicians? HOAs fronting for corporations? This could go statewide. Good, I told him. But don't publish yet. Let them show their hand a little more. The second step was pressure. I reached out to county officials and politely asked for clarification on the legality of HOA signs being installed on private, covenant-protected property. Their responses were hesitant, some evasive, but I recorded every call. The cracks were showing already. Someone had leaned on them to stay quiet. And the third step, well, that was where Owen came in. He orchestrated a sting, rigging the pasture with discreet trail cameras disguised as fence posts. Every time Victoria's crew trespassed, we captured crystal-clear footage, license plates, faces, even conversations carried on when they thought no one was listening. One worker muttered, "Why's the boss pushing so hard? Ain't no HOA, rules cover mineral rights." That one sentence was gold. Proof they were digging for more than just compliance. When the footage rolled in, Owen grinned. We've got them. Not just on trespassing, but conspiracy. If this goes to court, Victoria won't just lose, she'd drag half her sponsors down with her. But the most satisfying moment came when I drove into town.com as a preacher on Sunday and walked right past Victoria in the cafe. She gave me that smug smile, the kind that said she thought she was winning. I didn't flinch. I just sat, my phone on the table, screen flashing with a paused video clip, her crew tearing down my fences. Her smile faltered. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, leaning in so others couldn't hear. "No," I said evenly. "You did. And now, every move you make only tightens the noose." That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to scream or threaten. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. That night, Owen and I drafted a legal notice, professional, devastating. It cited the 1912 covenant, detailed the acts of trespass, and warned of immediate legal action for damages and harassment. Copies were sent to Victoria, the HOA board, and, most importantly, the county clerk's office. The message was clear. The Thorns were not backing down. But the counterattack wasn't just about legal papers or evidence. It was psychological. Every time Victoria passed a neighbor, she'd wonder if they knew the truth. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd wonder if it was the journalist ready to go public. For the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes. And doubt, once planted, spreads fast. Still, I wasn't naive. People like Victoria don't fold after one warning shot. They double down. And I could feel it coming, the retaliation, the escalation. The storm wasn't over. In fact, it was about to break wide open. Victoria Hale was the type of woman who thrived on control. The more she lost her grip, the more vicious her claws became. After the legal notice landed on her desk and whispers started swirling in Willow Creek, she didn't retreat, she went on the offensive. The first blow came quietly. One morning, the water pressure in the ranch house dropped to a trickle. At first I thought it was an old pump acting up, but Owen discovered the truth before lunch. A cap on the main supply line had been twisted nearly shut, handprints still visible in the dust around it. Sabotage, plain and simple. Victoria hadn't just crossed a boundary, she'd violated basic survival. Elias always said a rancher could go without many things, but never without water. And now, she was willing to choke the land dry to break me. The second blow was louder. 2 nights later, I woke to the low rumble of an engine and the snapping of wood. Cameras lit up the screens in Elias's office, revealing a pickup hauling through the west pasture. The truck swerved deliberately into the fence, smashing posts, then reversed to finish the job. The men laughed as they planted fresh HOA signs. In the gap, as if the land had suddenly switched ownership in the dead of night, I called the sheriff's office. The deputy promised to look into it, his voice uneasy, but no cruiser ever showed. Owen shook his head when I hung up. She's got them spooked. Maybe bought, maybe threatened, but definitely spooked. The third blow was personal. Clara Benson, the neighbor who had shared her story about Victoria's bullying, called in tears. Someone had left a notice on her door. Remove your illegal garden within 30 days, or face daily fines. The kicker? Clara's house wasn't even inside Willow Creek's jurisdiction, but that didn't stop Victoria from flexing her fake authority to silence anyone siding with me. She's turning the screws, Clara whispered. She wants us scared, but fear cuts 2 ways, and I could feel the current shifting. Each heavy-handed move she made only added more cracks to her facade. Still, retaliation comes with consequences. By the end of the week, I found a fresh insult carved into the ranch itself. A red flag, literally planted beside my grandfather's headstone in the family cemetery. The camera footage showed a man in a hoodie, gloved, kneeling at the grave. Before driving off in a truck registered to Willow Creek Property Services, desecrating Elias's resting place wasn't just an attack, it was war. My blood boiled, but anger had to wait. I needed strategy, not fists. Owen and I huddled in the study late into the night, reviewing every clip, every text, every incident. The evidence pile was growing into a mountain, undeniable and damning. Still, Victoria was playing a long game, and it was clear she wasn't acting alone. Developers, board members, maybe even a county official or two. It was a web, and she was the spider in the middle. This isn't just about harassment, Owen said grimly. She's trying to make this land unlivable, force you into a corner. If you sell, she wins. If you stay, she escalates. I leaned back in Elias's leather chair, staring at the flickering footage of the flag at his grave. My jaw tightened. Then it's time we escalate. Too quietly, smart, but on our terms. Because Victoria Hale had just made the one mistake. No tyrant should ever make. She went after family, and for that, she was about to find out exactly how far a thorn would go to protect blood and land. For weeks, Victoria Hale had wielded fear like a weapon. She fined, she threatened, she harassed until most folks in Willow Creek stopped resisting and simply gave in. But tyrants always push too far, and that's when people begin to see the cracks. It started small. Clara Benson, the teacher with the garden, wasn't about to let Victoria bulldoze her vegetables or her dignity. Instead of backing down, she snapped photos of the notice and posted them online. Harassed for growing tomatoes. The caption read, "Within hours." The post spread across local groups, sparking outrage. If Victoria thought fear would silence her, she underestimated the stubbornness of a schoolteacher who'd been wrangling teenagers for 30 years. Next came Jim Harlan, a quiet accountant who had lived in the subdivision since its first homes were built. For years, he'd kept his head down, paying every special fee that appeared in his mailbox. But Clara's post lit something in him. He pulled out his ledgers, combed through the HOA's so-called expenses, and discovered the numbers didn't add up. Tens of thousands had vanished into maintenance projects that never happened. Jim showed the records to his neighbors, and suddenly, the whispers became shouts. By the time Owen and I drove into town for supplies, the air felt different. Where there had once been resignation, there was now anger, organized, focused anger. Flyers appeared on fences and telephone poles. Oust Victoria Hale, restore dignity to Willow Creek. That evening, Clara called me again. Her voice was buzzing with energy, this time, not fear. "We're holding a meeting at the community center tomorrow. People are ready to talk, really talk. You should be there." I went, though I expected only a handful of frustrated neighbors. Instead, 30 cars lined the gravel lot. Inside, the room was packed shoulder to shoulder, faces tense but determined. On the wall hung a giant poster of the HOA charter, highlighted in red ink where Victoria had twisted the rules to her liking. Clara opened the floor. "How many of you have been fined for nonsense? For gardens, fences, porch lights?" Nearly every hand shot up. "How many of you have been threatened with lawsuits that never materialized?" Again, a sea of hands. Jim stepped forward next, holding up his binder. "She's been stealing from us. Ghost projects, phantom repairs, bogus invoices, it's all here. She's pocketed nearly 90 grand under the table." The room went silent. Then someone in the back muttered, "She robbed us blind." Another voice added, "And we let her." That's when Tom Riley, a builder who'd clashed with Victoria over permits, stood up. He pointed to the charter. "Half these codes aren't even legal. They're fabrications." She's been bluffing us for years. A wave of realization swept through the crowd. For the first time, people weren't looking at Victoria Hale as a powerful figure, they were looking at her as a fraud. By the end of the meeting, a vote was called. Hands went up unanimously. Demand her resignation and schedule new elections. It wasn't official yet, but it was a spark strong enough to spread through every household in Willow Creek. That night, as I drove back to the ranch, the stars overhead seemed brighter than they had in weeks. For the first time, I wasn't fighting Victoria alone. She had made enemies not just of me, but of the very community she claimed to protect. And when a neighborhood turns against its tyrant, the fall isn't slow, it's sudden, brutal, and unstoppable. The rebellion in Willow Creek rattled Victoria, but what truly cracked her armor wasn't a crowd of angry neighbors, it was betrayal from within. Every empire, no matter how arrogant, has someone on the inside waiting for a chance to jump ship. For Victoria, that man was Martin Kane. It started with a phone call from the state attorney general's office. Owen patched it through while I was reviewing security footage in Ilias's study. The voice on the other end was cautious, measured, and just a little desperate. "My name is Martin Kane. I used to work with Victoria Hale, but I can't anymore. I need to talk." At first I thought it was a trap. Why would someone loyal to Victoria suddenly switch sides? But then he dropped the hook. "She hired me to coordinate the acquisition of your ranch. I have documents, recordings, financials. If I testify, I want immunity." Owen leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of acquisition?" "The kind that would have turned my grandfather's land into dust." When we met Martin, in a quiet coffee shop 2 towns over, he didn't look like a villain. Slick suit, nervous hands, glancing at every doorway like shadows might follow him. But the flash drive he slid across the table was the real deal. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, even recorded Zoom calls where Victoria laid out her plan. Her voice crackled from my laptop speakers. "The Thorn Ranch is prime. Once we force him to sell, we can push the resort development. Water control, property devaluation, pressure tactics, it all saves us $12 million. Hearing her scheme laid bare in her own words made my skin crawl. It wasn't just harassment, it was organized fraud. Martin explained everything. 6 months ago, Victoria had brought him on as a consultant, dangling promises of money and influence. His job was to smooth the paperwork, adjust land surveys, and make it look like the ranch fell under Willow Creek's HOA boundaries. In exchange, he'd pocket a cut when the resort broke ground. But Victoria pushed too hard, too fast. The water tampering, the cemetery threats, those crossed lines Martin hadn't agreed to. And when he caught wind of the Attorney General sniffing around, his survival instinct kicked in. He wanted out before the whole ship sank. "She's not just after your land," he whispered, glancing around the cafe. "She's got county officials greased, developers lined up, even some bank contacts ready to flip the financing. It's bigger than you think." I sat back, letting it sink in. Ilias's ranch wasn't just a target, it was a keystone. If Victoria succeeded here, she'd set a precedent to steamroll anyone in her path. Owen folded his arms. "If you're telling the truth, you've just confessed to conspiracy. You'd better hope the AG keeps that immunity promise." Martin nodded quickly. "I'll wear a wire. I'll record her meetings, whatever it takes." That was the moment I knew Victoria's empire was about to crumble, not from lawsuits, not from angry neighbors, but from her own ally turning states. Evidence, because if there's one thing corruption can't survive, it's sunlight. And Martin Kane had just cracked open every blind in the house. But he also issued a warning as we stood to leave. "She's planning something big this weekend. One last push to break you. If she pulls it off, none of this evidence will matter." His eyes darted toward the window. "She won't go quietly, and when she makes her move, you'd better be ready." Martin Kane's warning played in my head all week. She's planning something big this weekend. The timing couldn't have been crueler. Saturday marked Ilias's memorial service, a quiet gathering meant to honor the man who built our legacy brick by brick, acre by acre. Family, old ranch hands, and neighbors were set to come together to share stories, prayers, and food. But beneath the grief, I felt the hum of tension, like thunderclouds massing on the horizon. By mid-morning, guests began to arrive, cars crunching along the gravel drive. The cemetery sat beneath a great oak, shaded, peaceful. Flowers were arranged, benches polished, and for the first time since Ilias's passing, the ranch felt alive with warmth. Yet every smile was edged with worry. Clara pulled me aside. "You think she'll show up, don't you?" I nodded. If Martin's right, today's her stage, and she didn't disappoint. Just as the minister prepared to begin, the rumble of a diesel engine echoed down the road. Heads turned. A rented box truck rolled into view. Pulling behind it, a trailer stacked with equipment, tripods, survey markers, and bright orange stakes. Out stepped Victoria Hale in full regalia, hard hat, reflective vest, and a badge that looked official until you realized it was printed on laminate. 3 men followed, dressed like inspectors, clipboards in hand. The audacity was staggering. She strode across the lawn as if she owned it, ignoring gasps and muttered curses from the mourners. Stopping at the family cemetery, she raised her voice loud enough for all to hear. Per compliance inspection under state standards, these graves are in violation. We're marking the boundaries for immediate correction. A stunned silence followed, then erupted into shouts. You can't do this, Clara cried. This is sacred land, someone else shouted, but Victoria pressed on, slamming an orange flag into the earth by Ilias's headstone. Maintained property now, she declared, as though she were reading a verdict. I stepped forward, heat burning in my chest. Victoria, you're trespassing, you're disrupting a funeral, and you're impersonating an officer of the state. She smirked, adjusting her hard hat. Governor Thorne or not, you're subject to HOA law. This land is coming under compliance today. That was it. I pulled my phone, started recording, and raised my voice so everyone could hear. Repeat that for the camera. Her eyes flickered with irritation, but pride wouldn't let her back down. This property falls under Willow Creek Estate's jurisdiction. Non-compliance will result in seizure and reassignment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Judge Harlan, a retired magistrate and longtime friend of Elias, stepped forward with his cane. His voice cracked like a gavel. He just committed impersonation of state authority in front of 50 witnesses. That's a felony. Phones shot up everywhere. Filming neighbors like the big move Martin had warned about was unfolding in real time, and Victoria was handing us the rope to hang her scheme. When I blocked her path to Elias's bench, she snapped. She lunged, grabbing at the flowers laid across the stone. I caught her wrist, and she shrieked, "Assault? He's assaulting me." But the cameras told a different story. Someone dialed 911, voices rising around us. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Victoria ranted as deputies closed in, flailing and shrieking about her state authority even as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Her crew was detained too, their fake badges and rental contracts bagged as evidence. The service resumed in shaken silence after they were taken away. But as I looked around at the neighbors, at the ranch hands, at Clara holding back tears, realized something profound. This wasn't just a memorial for Ilias anymore. It was a line in the sand. Victoria Hale's reign of fear had ended right where it began. On the Thorne family's land, Victoria Hale's arrest at Ilias's memorial was not just an ending. It was the unraveling of everything she had built on fear, intimidation, and manipulation. For years, she had thrived on loopholes, half-truths, and the silence of people too afraid to challenge her. But now, every thread of her empire was exposed to the light, and once one snapped, the whole fabric collapsed. Within weeks, her case made headlines across the county. The district attorney filed multiple charges, impersonating a government official, trespassing, fraud, and attempted unlawful seizure of private property. The recordings from the memorial became the prosecution's strongest weapon, clear evidence of her lies, broadcast live by dozens of witnesses. What she thought was a display of power turned into the nail in her own coffin. The trial was swift and brutal. Witness after witness, neighbors, ranchers, even former HOA board members took the stand to describe her threats, her false fines, and the havoc she had caused. Judge Harlan's testimony carried weight, his authority cementing what the jury I already knew. This wasn't just a case of bad management. It was organized coercion. But when the verdict came, the courtroom held its breath, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to prison time and hefty restitution, ordering her to repay families she had bled dry with false penalties. Watching her led away in shackles, no longer the queen of the cul-de-sac, but just another convict, felt like the closing of a long, bitter chapter. But justice wasn't just about her punishment, it was about what came after. The community, once fractured and fearful, began to heal. Families who had been bullied out of their homes returned to the neighborhood meetings, this time with voices unshaken. The HOA, stripped of Victoria's influence, voted to dissolve itself entirely, handing back power to the residents. Landmarks that once felt like battlefields, gates, fences, driveways became symbols of freedom reclaimed. For me, the victory was personal. Standing on the ranch, with Ilias's grave beneath the oak tree, I felt the weight lift. My family's legacy was no longer under siege. Clara smiled more easily. The ranch hands carried themselves with pride, and neighbors dropped by with food and laughter. Instead of whispered warnings, Elias had always told me the land wasn't just dirt and fences, it was memory, sweat, and spirit. Victoria Hale tried to rewrite that legacy into a ledger of fines and power plays. Instead, her downfall etched a different truth into the soil. No tyrant, no matter how polished their badge or loud their voice, could ever own what was built on love, honor, and community. As the sun set behind the ridges, I tipped my hat toward the horizon. The storm had passed. The ranch was free, and the Thorne legacy, our legacy, would endure.